Topic alert! We're covering a hot and controversial topic in the AOT community, so beware of toxic and racist comments spoiling the anime, and to take everything with a grain of salt. Now, Bravo 6, going dark. Erwin Smith, one of the heroes of Attack on Titan, and likely one of the most compelling as well. Erwin was to be the leader which brought humanity and Eldia into a new dawn, but never experienced the new dawn he would help facilitate. But there is a nagging question I've had for a good minute now. Would Erwin become a Yaegerist? And then I found out it's certainly been discussed before, but I'm gonna put my own twist on it, this time with blackjack and hookers. So once and for all, would Daddy become a Yaegerist? Let's find out right after you subscribe and like the video. So, going over how to make this video in my head, I kept asking myself, how do we even begin to tackle this question? And boy, is it a complicated one to tackle, because we're talking about one of the most popular AOT characters, and if he would essentially be willing to commit a global atrocity. We can't just go on gut feelings here, or what we believe. We have to actually get the facts straight from the finely toned jaw itself. We have to establish who Erwin Smith is, as a character, as a leader, and as a person. Our first dive into Erwin should obviously be his leadership. And this is the main aspect of his character we are supposed to admire and look at the most. This, in other words, is the outer shell of the egg. So diving in, Erwin is the model leader, the best leader anyone could really ideally have. He's extremely smart in that he can plan missions that have complex structure and use of troops in ways that, while we may take for granted, is a trait almost nobody in this series probably has. Being a brilliant tactician isn't the only thing he's good at, though. He can command his troops with near complete confidence, so much so he is able to convince the most staunch person of his vision of the future of humanity. And if he doesn't, then the swaths of people following him will clue you in on what he's got cooking. He's infectious in the way he speaks, his body language, and his work. I mean, he could sell Naruto Uzumaki leaves, believe that. But I think the most important aspect here is he can lead any man or woman into the great unknown. The best example, and I'll keep this short since it's been talked about so much in my videos in the past, but the charge against the Beast Titan. This is where Erwin's leadership shines the brightest, and he uses every skill he has together in his final moments to convince countless soldiers with bright futures ahead of them to charge into their, well, very own demise. This is because Erwin would willingly sacrifice the life of many in pursuit of his goals. And as I've stated so many times, he would become the devil to stop a devil. This is exhibited in many of his qualities as a leader. This brings us to an important moment in Erwin's younger years, his father. This scene is so make or break for Erwin's character, as it defines who the man is remarkably well within just a few moments. So, let's dive in. Erwin's father was a teacher, and in class one day, just like everyone else had before, learned about the history of the walls. Being told about how they had a newfound peace inside the walls, resolving their conflict prior, Erwin asked a question. His father simply didn't answer in class, but afterwards he told Erwin about the many contradictions of the textbooks handed out to them. Erwin was enamored, but didn't quite understand why he hadn't said this in class, which is when he started to share it around. This would be a mistake, as the government would silence his father by killing him in an accident. From that day onward, though, Erwin lived to prove his father right, that the memories of humans were altered somehow. And he did. He proved this fact, and overthrew the previous government through a revolution. A revolution which didn't require much violence at that. But until the very end of his life, he still lived by this edict. Our first question we have to ask is a big one. Would Erwin support the overthrowing of Paradis's military? Now, many people would simply say, well, yeah. And that's very understandable, because Erwin overthrew the previous government through his own plan. And if Erwin believes in the absolute victory of Paradis and the absolute protection of his own people, then Why wouldn't he overthrow the military if it means supporting Aaron's global atrocity, which would objectively mean the survival of Paradis and his people? The reality, though, is that he likely wouldn't support Flock or Aaron in this endeavor, as if he were alive, he likely would just successfully negotiate the release of Aaron in some shape or form, possibly eliminating the entire outcome of the Yaegerists existing in the first place, something we'll talk about again here in a moment. The reason for this is that Erwin's death is what caused the rise of the Yaegerists in the first place, the byproduct of which would result in the overthrowing of Paradis's government, instilling a new military leader in the process, the previous leader of which would be Erwin. It wouldn't make sense at all to overthrow the leader everyone is universally happy with. So, what of the governments in action? Well, we saw that they were pretty much willing to let Marley, in some sense of the word, come steamroll them. Well, this is also due in part to Erwin's death as well, at least a little bit, as with a better fit leader to lead humanity like Erwin, the negotiations in Marley may have gone way better than previously, and they likely would have at the very least been different. Because of this, I think it's safe to say that Erwin would not support the violent revolution of the Yaegerists. Then we have a huge one. Would Erwin support the Yaegerists' actions? What I mean by this is that, would Erwin believe in the idea of murdering his own people if they did not agree with his vision? Basically, would Erwin be willing to silence those which speak against their own beliefs? Obviously, this is a no. Erwin was spurred on by the fact his father was killed for questioning the truth. That's the entire character's motive. So to say he would support, for example, Flock's actions of murdering people as an act to silence criticism is utterly preposterous. If anything, Erwin would arrest Flock and put him in prison for the rest of his life as a criminal, as this is not something Erwin believes in doing. He believes in the opposite. The absolute survival of his people, not the murdering of them. This also doesn't mean that because he's so willing to sacrifice soldiers that he's willing to sacrifice innocent civilians either. Those are two separate things. The reason is because Erwin believes that the soldiers' lives are meant for a greater purpose. They are meant to push forward until they achieve their goals of freedom. In other words, they're a tool. Also, there is a great scene in the final season part 2. It's a brief interaction between Flock murdering Kiyomi's mechanics. Flock tells Kiyomi to basically give up, that there is no point in fighting as the Yaegerist will win anyways and annihilate everyone, assuring their victory. But Kiyomi states that even if Flock were to win this and does just as he says, that it matters not. There will always be people who think they're wrong, and thus conflict will continue forever. This is a direct reference to earlier in the series in which Erwin states that humanity will fight until there is only one person left. This is basically what Kiyomi is saying to Flock, which Flock takes umbrage to. Obviously, by this point in the series, Flock is an unhinged man bent on maniacal destruction. But this proves that Flock really didn't get or understand Erwin at all. Or maybe he did, as we'll discuss here in a moment. To Flock, Erwin's entire person boiled down to power and exerting the power against their enemies. The reality is that he made a black and white picture of a painting with many different layers, colors, and themes. Flock never really truly understood Erwin in that sense. This is most evident with the twisting of words Flock used in order to get the people of Paradis to split into two factions, Yaegerists or against Yaegerists. And I'm wondering, that sounds really familiar with the AOT community, how art imitates life. This is seen in the final season part Deuce, when normal civilians, after the activating of the rumbling, are arguing how the innocent people Aaron and Flock kill are just sacrifices for the greater good, because as one of them said, you cannot win without making sacrifices. This is a bastardization of Erwin's ideals relating to the charge against the Beast Titan and his use of soldiers. Erwin didn't want to willingly sacrifice them, but he knew the only way to move forward was to make a tough decision to do that, which he never thought was right, morally speaking. Remember, Erwin has always held the belief that he must protect his people. Him choosing to only support that logic with a few is absolutely a twisting of his own words and beliefs by Flock and the Yaegerists. If we also remember, it's the very same beliefs of Erwin that helped Paradis proper in the first place, because without them, Historia would not be the queen of Paradis Island. That's a fact. So it really makes no sense unless you twist his words to conform to a twisted mindset, which Flock and the Yaegerists have. And as well, we gotta talk about the people next to Erwin, the two people who aren't Erwin, Levi and Hanj, who do not support the Yaegerists' actions. We can't just ignore these people, as these two are the people who are the closest to Erwin. Hanj was loyal to Erwin and stuck with him just as much as Levi did, meaning that she knows Erwin better than anyone, and as we see in the final season part 2, Hanj is not in support of the Yaegerist genocide. Not in the least. This is because she sees the past visions of all of the commanders and makes the best decision on what they would decide. Then we have Levi, who is Erwin's right-hand man. The guy who stays with Erwin in his dreams if he could. Free fanfic ideas, Erwin fans, just saying. He would follow Erwin into hell and back and has on multiple occasions. Levi also does not support the Yaegerists or the Rumbling. So why do they not support the Yaegerists? Well, because Erwin would not support the Yaegerists. It's as easy as that. You are the company you keep after all. Nobody hangs out with wildly different people. If you're a musician, you're probably not going to hang out with a politician, as an example. And I know that's sort of a basic assumption, but the idea definitely holds true. People hang out with people of similar interests. That's just how humans work. So putting 2 and 2 together, we can clearly see that Erwin likely wouldn't support the Yaegerists or their actions, which means the people that he chose to represent him would not support the Yaegerists' actions. Then we have the big one. Would Erwin support the Rumbling? This is a very heated debate, but one I think is very clear if you understand the tactical nature of Erwin, or at least as clear as you can get it. It is one of my beliefs that Erwin would not support the Rumbling in Aaron's form. So, as a reminder, Aaron wants to eliminate all of life outside of Paradis. This is of everything. People, wildlife, nature, literally everything outside Paradis will be flattened to dirt. Smash! That being said, I do think Erwin would propose an alternative, which is the partial rumbling, but not in the sense of the one which was discussed in the show. The partial rumbling in the show is proposed as something which would bring about temporary peace, a test rumbling, if you will. While this would buy them time, it would be putting off the inevitable, the demise of Paradis through Marley's hands. So I think Erwin would propose something more risky, but ultimately a little bit better, which is a partial rumbling in which the Wall Titans are sent to disable the world's military power's offensive capabilities. By doing such a thing, they would be the only ones in the world with a strong enough offense to negotiate more meaningful terms, ones that would be more fair. This spares the billions of innocent people, nature, and the planet from being nearly eradicated and levels the playing field rather than tipping the scale. This probably would be favorable for multiple sides as well. For the people in Squad Levi and the larger government, it would be a surefire way of ensuring peace and fair treatment. As for the more, shall we say, pro-war people, it would be satiating that as well. Not that that's a good thing. Hell, as viewers, we would not only get to see the rumbling, but we might get to see the Wall Titans in a more one-on-one scenario, which calls back to the beginning of the final season. Do Titans matter in a world where advanced technology makes them obsolete? Though, this does leave one thing up to question. How does Aaron eliminate all the Titans if he himself is using the power of the Titans to assure victory? That is a question I'll leave you guys to answer in the comments below. So, would Erwin Smith become a Yaegerist? I think the answer is a resounding no. Would he support Flock? No, absolutely not. Even if only on the basis alone that Flock kills the very people Erwin swears to protect as his life mission, let alone the fact that the dude has no way to usurp Erwin if Erwin being alive in the first place gives no meaning for the Yaegerist to exist at all. Though it does get a little more murky when we ask the question if Erwin would support Aaron's rumbling. While we absolutely do not know for sure, don't let anyone tell you otherwise, not even myself. We can only really fantasy book the possibilities. But what we can say for certain is that in its current incarnation, Erwin likely wouldn't support 100% rumbling unless he exhausted literally every other option. Remember, the rumbling as it is was born through a complex line of events from Erwin dying, the Yaegerist rising to power, Aaron's mental state, and the shift of leadership to Hanj, among many other complex worldly things going on in AOT. Erwin being alive almost creates an entirely different scenario, one in which all bets are off. But one thing I do believe in, Erwin would not be a Yaegerist despite likely supporting some form of the rumbling. But let me know. Do you agree or disagree? What do you think? Would Erwin become a Yaegerist? Would he support the rumbling? Remember, to be civilized, all attacks towards people, insults, and racist and sexist remarks will be reported and banned from this channel. If you enjoy my content, support me on Patreon. By doing so, you get access to 3 weeks of One Piece videos in advance of their public release. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.